From regenerative agriculture in the food choices that we make and participate in every day, to investing with intent, where and how we allocate our money and the implications of those decisions are not always obvious. Yet our investment choices really do matter. Let's learn more about this from true industry insiders. Niall O'Sullivan is the Chief Investment Officer of Asia, Middle East, and Africa for Investment Solutions at Mercer. He is responsible for the design, implementation, and ongoing supervision of Mercer Investment Management's fund solutions for all AMEA clients and discretionary management services. It's a pleasure to have you here, Niall. Over to you.
Wherever you are, and thanks a million for taking the time to join us today. We're going to talk about a number of topics over the next while, and what I'd like to try and do to start it is maybe just ground the concept and the idea of the size of the global assets under management. So, just to give an idea of the size and ubiquity of the global asset management space, there's over 100 trillion that is managed directly by asset managers. And that's just what they manage. It doesn't include the wealth that individuals have in their own portfolios. And so when you're seeking and thinking about generating returns, generating change, it is those assets and the capital they provide and the reinvestment that they control that is a key part of everything that will follow. So for many of you in the call, you'll feel, well, okay, what's that got to do with me? That doesn't overlap with my world. But actually, about 50 trillion of that 100 trillion is in various forms of pension and workplace savings solution. So if you have a 401k plan or some form of workplace savings, then your wealth figures somewhere in that number. And that plan will have a set of rules for how it engages, what it expects from the managers that manages assets, the types of assets that it will own, and the types of change that it will like to make. And your voice can make a difference. And you may say to yourself, oh, well, Mike, what can my voice do? But small holdings can have outsized influences. For example, engine number one only owned less than about 0.02% of Exxon, but yet they were still able to mount a campaign to get board members elected. So therefore, you have the ability to engage through your plan, through the rules, to see what you'll do on an ongoing basis. So that's the asset management landscape that we start with. Now let's think about what we know, or as the IPCC would call it, the elements that we have high confidence in. Humans are impacting and have impacted climate. Increasingly, this impact is leading to results that are going to result in temperature increases of 1.5 degrees or more, and keeping it to 1.5 degrees or less is becoming increasingly hard. Many governments and companies have committed to pathways to try and achieve this 1.5 degree or less. And that is going to result in actions. It's going to mean that we are going to do less of some things and more of other things. And investors have got to factor that into portfolio design. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about sustainability and impact, because what I've just talked about leads to you having to consider the 4 R's. And those 4 R's are return, risk, regulation, and reputation. And it is the second 2 that are going to influence the first 2. Reputation is going to put a soft cost on externalities that have been ignored up until now. There will be threats on social license to operate for individual companies. Regulation is going to put a formal price on the externalities that were previously ignored. And that is going to lead to people losing their actual license to operate. And that regulatory side is critical. Without regulation, it is going to be impossible to achieve the goals that we talked about a few minutes ago. And sustainability is just the incorporation of those factors into your investment decision. Some people will say, isn't that just investing? And I would say it is. But when I started out my career 25 years ago, I didn't see much talk about it in the textbooks or the risk variance models and all the things that are going on. So it may well be just investing, but you have to make sure that it is being incorporated on an ongoing basis. And then on top of that, impact is intentionally making investments to cause those outcomes to occur. Ideally, outcomes that would not have happened if you had not made that impact. And it's referred to as additionality. But you're doing it while still seeking an investment return. And everybody is going to have to figure out where on that journey they want to be between the incorporation of sustainability into their risk and the impact that they want to make. Now, one thing that I'd like to say, and I wish I didn't have to say it in the day that's in it, but this is going to be hard. The world is powered by fossil fuels and by processes that release CO2, be it plugging in, keeping cool, moving around, making food, or manufacturing. These are all processes that currently use fossil fuels or emit CO2 today. When you consider that the world is adding a city the size of, or the equivalent of a city the size of New York to the world every 6 to 12 weeks, it brings into focus the amount of construction and manufacturing that will bring. We also have to consider that the developing world are aiming to have similar standards of living to those in the developed, and they will be looking to try and get to there. And so we have to think about the trade-offs between those. We can't just have a hard stop. We also have to recognize that by changing behaviors of companies, by changing the behaviors of some of the highest emitters, that will be the way to have the greatest outcome. Divestment, unless you ally it to the other things we've talked about, regulation, taxation, consumer action, it just won't work. All it will do is increase or decrease the price that people will have to pay for those prospective income streams. So it's going to require actions across all those areas. So, what to do for you as an investor? Well, first of all, you've got to figure out what your beliefs are. Where do you want to be on that spectrum between sustainability and where do you want to focus your impact? So to maybe make it a little bit more real, let me give you an example. We were working with a large asset owner. First of all, using our right tool, they took a temperature check, excuse the pun, of where they were at a point in time. They used that to then set their key beliefs and principles. They first of all then looked at voting and engagement. How were the people that were managing their assets, be they actively managed or passively managed, engaging and voting with the companies that they owned? They made sure that key priorities were set and that they were communicated to those asset managers. And they monitored on an ongoing basis that the managers were voting, how they had voted, and what initiatives they were going to engage in. They then considered how their portfolio was going to transition. They set a science-based target for where they wanted to get to with key staging points that were going to be marked along the way. They looked at the assets that they owned. They looked at those that were green, embracing the change, the gray, that had a lot of change to be done, and the in-between, where things could be done on an ongoing basis. And they built a plan whereby they were going to own more of the green and influence the in-between and avoid the grey, but all subject to the levels of price in the marketplace, what they referred to as decarbonisation at the right price. On sustainability, they made sure that every manager that they worked with incorporated it into their risk and return lens, that it wasn't just a quantitative process. They wanted to make sure they were thinking about all these factors on an ongoing basis. And they made deliberate allocations to a number of thematic strategies that were going to create return opportunities from this transition. And on the impact, in the areas where they had the highest belief, they considered impact investing in those spaces and directed their capital there. And lastly, in order to make sure that their overall reputation was guarded, they codified all this into a sustainable investment policy. This was presented to their senior stakeholders and was available for communication as required externally. So before I hand over to Klaus to bring this on a little bit further, I'd probably like to just get you to kind of think about what are the key takeaways. I think the key takeaways for everybody on this call, be it you individually or for those of you that have stewardship of broader asset pools, you've got to figure out what it is your beliefs are, how do you want to incorporate sustainability into your investment, and where do you want to focus on an impact on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Niall, thank you so much for those very clear action steps. We have heard you loud and clear. Much appreciated. Next, we have Dr. Klaus Kunz, Head of ESG External Engagement and Performance Reporting at Bayer. Klaus has been with Bayer since 2001, working on directing business strategic topics like research and development, project management, and sustainability. He's been leading Bayer's ESG strategy, and I know he has quite the story to share. Without further delay, let's hand the mic over to Klaus.
Hey, thank you, Sweeta, for the very nice words, and thanks for having me on behalf of Bayer today in this really super cool conference. And I'm really delighted that I have the chance to share with you a little bit on Bayer's journey, because actually we are a company working in health and nutrition, and I think it's a company with potential positive impact, which I want to share. I want to start on a positive note. You know, Bayer has about 100,000 employees, and I think we are a pretty good mirror of societal changes as well. We have it in our own company. And I want to share that the awareness that we don't have time has dramatically increased in the last couple of years, also inside of the company. So, I mean, we are very clear on all levels in the organization that we need to move and that we need to change things. The first time this became material was in like 4 years ago, when our senior leadership decided to put sustainability at the core of our business and company strategy, which was a distinct move away from where we have been before. And I think it materialized very quickly, and the urgency became very clear that the first decisions were taken for Bayer, being a very large ship in a lightning fast time. We decided to become a carbon neutral company following the science-based targets 4 years ago. Our leadership in general said that non-financial targets are equally important to financial targets in the future, which I think is a massive change. And they also connected the success of achieving those targets to their own remuneration. And I know that this is what investors always want to know first. Is it connected to the remuneration of the top management? Yes, it is. But there was also a lot of commitments taken very soon related, for example, in the health area, that we want to satisfy the need of 100 million women in low and middle income countries for modern contraception in the next 10 years, that we want to help people and support people in underserved communities with better nutrition, 100 million also in the next 10 years. And you know, all these decisions are significant business decisions. This is not just doing projects which give some positive resonance in the media. This is redirecting the business towards more sustainability patterns and areas. But I'm sure you want to know more about agriculture, because that's the most controversial debate that crop science went through, Bayer Crop Science, in the last couple of years. And also here we made some decisions which I think are even more impactful than in the health area. And we first started to think, what of all the things that we currently already do are really material, and what are creating the biggest impact, and where do we need to change things? And I think in the last couple of weeks in Europe, particularly in Europe, the topic of food security has come back to our minds, that food security is not a given. That's in Germany, I can share. That's something which is a massive learning after almost 70 years of zero thinking about food security. Today, we are missing some basic products in the supermarket, and we face an upcoming food security crisis. So we made this commitment already 3 years ago that we need to help to provide enough safe and affordable food, but we need to make sure that it's also there where it's most needed, namely in the countries, low and middle income countries, once again, in Asia and in Africa, where I think we were not present enough. So another business decision taken to redirect investments, capital and resources to support 100 million smallholder farmers in those countries in the next 10 years. Through partnerships, access to capital, access to products, access to markets, access to trainings, and all these type of things. I think it's a massive plan. It's a business plan which is already fully underway. On the other hand, we realized that, you know, the other two topics which our industry usually didn't talk so much about is the impact on the environment of our products of agriculture. And we need to be very clear and outspoken that, of course, agriculture impacts the environment, impacts biodiversity, and also impacts climate. So to produce more on the one hand is one thing, to impact less on the other thing is the other thing. And it's a bit of a paradox, but we have no other way. We need to improve on both ends. And to work on the environmental side, we committed, for example, to reduce the environmental impact of, we call it crop protection, you might call it pesticides, but the impact of those pesticides, our pesticides, in the next 10 years also by 30%. which is significant. And we think that technology can help, precision application, for example, so that in the future, those products are only applied when needed and in the amount needed and where needed. But please, that's a really dramatic mindset shift from a business model which was driven through inputs before into much more of an output-driven business model, where the lesser inputs we have, the better the outcome is. So it's a change, massive change. The other topic, and this is the one I want to close with, is climate. We made a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on the fields of our customers also by 30% in the next 10 years. And here's something happened which I'm particularly proud of, and it shows that we are really serious about it and try to go fast. And really fast is that we saw an opportunity, because if we cannot come up with business models that are attractive for farmers, it's not going to scale. And the opportunity is that companies like Bayer, many other companies at this point of time, need to offset parts of their emissions because they cannot go down to zero. So somebody else has to close the cycle for us and bring the carbon back into the soil which we are emitting. And we were wondering if farmers couldn't play a positive role here. If farmers couldn't be part of the solution in the future. And they can, because they grow crops. So we have basically started this, we call it the Bayer Carbon Initiative. We are following very, very standardized, certified procedures. Farmers who follow those procedures, they might get into the opportunity of creating value by doing climate smart agriculture. And this is what we are looking for, business opportunities for doing things better and more sustainable. And this is how we can connect a commitment to reduce our emissions, for example, to an impactful commitment and an impactful opportunity for growers to create value. Because it's the triangle, people, planet, but also profit, which must be respected. And if the profit doesn't work for farmers, they can't adopt. I want to close with that. That's the series of things which we have implemented. For me, it's important is that we implement it, not only committed, but that we're on a trajectory to do these type of things. And I really ask you, if you want, take a look in our sustainability report and track us down on our progress and give us feedback. And tell us if you think that's right or wrong. Tell us if it's enough or if it's not enough, if it's ambitious enough or not, if the measures and the methodologies are the right ones. Because if we cannot find the acceptance on a broader societal level, it's not going to fly, and it's not going to fit into an ESG strategy in the future. So that's my ask for you. Help us to do it right. We are committed to do it right, but we need your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Klaus, for those words. And you are definitely interacting with the right organization. The whole point and purpose of We Don't Have Time and our app is to be able to connect companies to users so that they can actually respond and give feedback. So thank you for that call to action, because you will surely be hearing from our global user community. And we love facilitating that kind of engagement, because exactly, we need to bring everyone into the fold to be part of the solution, to help give feedback so the companies really do hold themselves to the highest standard and do better if they need to. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and we appreciate you sharing your story with us. Please stay on as we move into our panel, and we're going to loop in 3 additional speakers as well. So we have Max Messervy, who is Senior Sustainable Investment Consultant in Mercer US's Sustainable Investments team. Max provides advice on sustainable investment strategies, climate change, and impact investment approaches throughout investment processes. We also have with us Inge West, who is Senior Sustainable Investment Specialist in Mercer's European Investment Solutions business. She's based in London and is responsible for advising and driving the implementation of sustainable investment practices across the Mercer Investment Solutions offerings, with a focus on integrating ESG factors, sustainability trends, climate change, and stewardship within the investment process. We're also thrilled to have with us McKnight Foundation's Director of Investments, Elizabeth McGeveran, who oversees the team that manages the foundation's $3 billion endowment. With her leadership and vision, the foundation committed to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions across its entire portfolio by 2050, the largest private U.S. foundation to do so. So we really have a powerhouse team here to understand how asset owners play a key role in helping clients prepare for their future. And generally how to think about client futures and ensure that sustainability is really where investment is headed. So thank you all for being here. I'm excited about this discussion we're about to have. And I'll start with you, Elizabeth. This is fascinating what you've done under your leadership at McKnight and the lofty goals that you've set. Why is this so important to you? Why is leading on this commitment so critical to McKnight more broadly?
It's critical to McKnight because we are a climate change grant maker. So we recently kind of hearkening back to the urgency that Klaus talked about, we doubled our grant making to the climate change space several years ago. So we now provide $30 million to the nonprofit organizations, the policy actors, the advocates, the disruptors to do the work in the Midwest of the US. And if the Midwest region of the US was a country of its own, our region would be the 6th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. That's how much industrial and coal burning energy production happens in this region of the US. So once we'd made that commitment, it included the words that it was urgent and we needed to be bold. And frankly, we only give away 5% of our endowment every year, and the remaining 95% of the endowment remains invested in capital markets. So it became really clear that we were being beat on climate before we even arrived at the office in the morning. And that meant we needed to be bolder and more urgent with our endowment and try to find ways to invest differently so that we could contribute to, both benefit from all of the wonderful innovation that's coming from the transition to a clean economy, but also make sure that we were reducing our risks to the older economy and kind of old ways of doing things. So we see it as an opportunity to make money, we see it as an opportunity to reduce risk, and we see it as a way to be kind of coherently aligned between the work that my colleagues are doing in the world and the work the investment team is doing in the markets.
This really is a win-win-win, and you're making that very clear. So to those who are tuning in that are thinking about investments of themselves as individuals, of the broader organizations that they engage with or affiliate with, this is how to think about it. Setting these lofty standards is what we should all be aspiring to achieve. So thank you for sharing that, Elizabeth. Let's go to Max. Max, we're talking really about how to help guide clients to set their priorities and really help prepare them for a future that is aligned to this broader sustainability mission. How do you think about this? How does Mercer help clients do this?
Sure, and thanks. So our sustainable investment practice at Mercer started back in 2004 on a formal basis. And so we've been working on these issues for nearly 20 years now. We have 25 dedicated specialists around the world, and we've been advising clients on socially responsible and sustainable investment topics for decades, even prior to the founding of our team. So across investor movements on hot button topics such as divesting from businesses operating in apartheid era South Africa in the 1980s, or tobacco manufacturers in the 1990s to, of course, climate change today, we've been helping our clients to address key emerging risks and opportunities in their portfolios for many years. So over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of engagements with clients around the world, our SI team, or Sustainable Investments team, has developed a 4-step process that we call the SI Pathway to help our clients clarify their perspectives and develop strategic approaches to considering key issues within their investment portfolios. So these 4 steps are beliefs, policy, process, and portfolio. There's tons of details we could discuss about each of those steps, but I think it's really worth focusing here on just the first 2, the beliefs and the policy. And so when we're talking to our investors, we start our engagements by first, providing educational sessions to our clients around, what does sustainable investing mean? What's the terminology that we're talking about? What are all the various acronyms that you want to be aware of and concepts? And they're able to then ask us, any clarifying questions that they might have. We then survey each of these individuals on this investment committee or board of trustees to understand their perspectives that they come to the table with. Do they believe in these topics? What's their level of understanding of the various concepts at play? And then bring those survey results back and kind of have a workshop session to discuss the results amongst the group, and then find areas of convergence or consensus and areas of divergence potentially. From there, we want to kind of create these belief statements. And these statements are really, an interesting sort of statement about what does this institution believe the future holds? And what do they believe that their role is in the world as an institution? It's a moment of almost self-reflection, if you will. It may be surprising to some in the audience that, major investors might start their sustainability journeys by thinking about what do they believe in about the world. But what we're really ultimately asking them is, what does the future look like? And what's the role that they play in helping to both, shape that future through potentially, say, impact investing, as Niall was referencing earlier, or potentially just to mitigate some of those risks that they might see out on the horizon, whether it's climate change or other ones. So for everyone listening in today, if you have investments of your own, whether through your retirement plan, you have a brokerage account or otherwise, you too can start to ask yourself, what sort of investor you'd like to be and what are your beliefs about the world? Thinking through your own beliefs and then finding ways to incorporate them into your investments is really at the heart of what being an intentional investor is all about.
That's fantastic, Max. That really relates what it might be a black box for many people back to their daily lives. We're all wearing a variety of different hats, and the number one hat that we all share and have in common is we are humans and we have a belief system, and we need to help some align that belief system better to the reality of the risks that we are collectively facing related to the changes in our environment. So thank you for sharing that and giving our audience really tangible steps to take to think through their role in all of this. So I would love to turn now to Inge. We just heard from Max and Elizabeth how priorities are aligned to sustainability goals and how we see the future for ourselves, for the different organizations we affiliate with, and as employees of an organization like Mercer, how to help your clients better align their priorities to future sustainability goals. So how do you think about these priorities as part of a bigger picture, both company-wide and industry-wide?
Sure, thank you. So as an investment manager with approximately $440 billion in assets under management globally, we at Mercer Investment Solutions believe we have an important role to play in the transition and mobilizing capital towards more sustainable investments. Now, Mercer Investment Solutions uses an outsourced CIO approach. So we support institutional investors in an effort to meet their goals more efficiently by providing them with guidance on setting investment strategy, manager research and allocation, and the day-to-day operations of their investment program. Now, importantly, as a fund of funds manager, we have exposure to over 150 managers. And this affords us the opportunity to not only drive change within the investment solutions we manage, but also positively influence the investment managers we work with to invest with intent. This is so there's not only an impact through the portfolios they manage on our behalf, but rather on the market as a whole. Now, climate change is a systemic and financial risk, and it's one of our key investment beliefs, and therefore climate considerations are embedded throughout our investment process. We have also set a net zero commitment with interim targets across a number of our investment solutions in order to support the transition. Now, setting a net zero commitment is just the first step in the journey, and it requires a well-articulated plan if we are to achieve it. And there are 4 key levers that we use as part of our approach. So firstly, focusing on ESG integration. We look to allocate to managers that have embedded consideration of environmental, social, and governance factors into the investment process. Our dedicated manager research team has assigned over 4,500 ESG ratings to investment strategies, and we use these to inform our manager selection decisions. Secondly, as part of ESG integration, there's a specific focus on climate. We use tools such as climate scenario modeling to inform our asset class allocations, given different asset class sensitivities to climate change. We also use tools such as our proprietary Analytics for Climate Transition, aptly named as ACT, which uses a variety of climate-related metrics to assess climate-related risks and opportunities. They say what gets measured gets managed, and these tools provide us with the opportunity to monitor and manage our exposure to grey assets, so assets with high carbon intensity and low transition capacity, and green assets, so assets with low carbon intensity and high transition capacity. And thirdly, as much as the climate crisis poses significant risks, we know that there are numerous investment opportunities on the transition journey. and we seek to include allocations to sustainability-themed investments and investments that will drive the transition. And finally, as Niall alluded to earlier as well, we use our rights and responsibilities as active owners to influence the managers we invest in, to invest with intent, and to work with the underlying companies they invest in to implement more sustainable business practices. And, just to bring it to light slightly, this is done, for example, by encouraging these managers to develop and implement formal climate policies, support industry initiatives such as the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure and the more recent Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. We encourage them to enhance their climate-related disclosures, set decarbonization targets, and actively engage with underlying companies and be active in their voting activities. And we work with them to enhance the consideration of climate factors across their investment process.
Thank you, Inge. So from Mercer's ESG journey, I'm curious to get a different perspective on efforts in communication and ESG. So I'll come back to you, Klaus. It's no secret that Bayer has had its challenges and in terms of public perceptions, and has really made an effort to build back trust with consumers and various stakeholders. So how has ESG supported this effort at rebuilding trust?
I think two parts of the answer. The first thing, what I found very challenging in the beginning when designing a sustainability strategy, was to understand that in different geographies in the world, the understanding of what sustainability actually means is very different. So in Europe, we have a very strong environmental focus on the topic. In the Americas, it's a much stronger economic perspective on the same topic. And then in Asia, you would have much more the social dimension of sustainability. And, we need to come up with a triangle which is encompassing all those dimensions to get the acceptance around the world for what we do, but also to do the right things which are needed in the respective geographies. So it's really addressing the environmental pieces and the profitability pieces and the social dimensions at the same time, while we understand that not everything resonates equally strongly in every geography. That was important when it came to then translating a sustainability strategy into ESG, into an investable framework. I realized that the biggest doubts on us is on trust and transparency. So this is, I think, the area. It's not actually like change all your products, change all your offers that you have, because it's, I think, widely accepted that, we make a significant and even systemic contribution, for example, to food supply. But the way we are doing it and the way we talk about it, this is challenged by many investors and by many stakeholders. And I think it's an opportunity for us. But this is what we need to learn. We need to learn to acknowledge that we need to change, and also that we made mistakes in the past. And I think we are on a good track. And it's even rewarding if you speak in an audience with a lot of critical voices, that you really connect. But we need to start our communication at the concerns of the audience and not at our perspectives for the future. And I think then we can make a successful connection. That's my learnings from the last couple of months.
Yes, fantastic. Well, thank you for your candid response to that question. I'm sure it comes up, and that's why it's so important to have these cross-sector conversations as well, and to join forces with different types of organizations like foundations. And so back to you, Elizabeth, and the role that foundations can really play in aligning to the broader mission across the sector of philanthropy, but also generally, how do you think about the bigger mission for grant makers, and how do net zero goals really align to that larger grant making mission?
Well, I think the basis of philanthropy is belief in a better, different future. And sometimes it means that we know there are so many important social actors that need funding to do that work. But there is a piece of kind of more traditional approach to endowments and foundations, to those assets that we're built upon. There's a notion that there's a wall between us and the mission of the organization, and McKnight is really seeking kind of to integrate our views on the future and climate with our investment endowment. And I think one of the challenges in markets is sometimes people, there's an assumption that markets are kind of without morality. They're just reacting to what is. And I think that's a huge mistake, that asset owners really have a enormously important role in shaping future markets. And in order to shape markets, you have to send signals. And so one of the reasons McKnight made a net zero commitment was kind of hoping to invite some of our fellow foundations in the US into this conversation about how do we use our endowments to signal these important marketplaces. And it's been mentioned by colleagues in this session already, but the power of the customer, even an individual customer, or in this case, we're a $3 billion owner, our fund managers can manage up to $1 trillion. So it's important for them to hear from us. So we're asking for greenhouse gas emissions data on each of the funds in which we're invested. We're asking for how many of the investments in the portfolio are actually providing climate solutions. That kind of inquiry to your service providers is actually very motivating to them, because they know if this small foundation in the upper Midwest is asking me today, I can bet that these other much bigger, more important clients of mine are going to ask maybe next year or the year after. So I do think that that there's kind of a drive to integrate internally within our own walls, and then there's a desire to signal externally so that other financial actors can start getting the pieces in place. As you hear from Mercer, that they've already done that. They've heard from clients and continue to develop services because they've been signaled by their customers. So I think each of us has a role to play, whether we're one investor in a personal savings or a large institutional investor.
Absolutely. And you're paying attention to these signals, you're responding to the signals, and that's very clear here. Just this conversation is making it evident that you're paying attention and responding and reacting to the needs and wants of your clients and consumers. So one of the things that is being expressed globally is a desire to see increased partnership and collaboration. And it sounds like that's happening within philanthropy from what you've just explained to us, Elizabeth. I'm curious as to how this is happening in the asset owner sectors. So Max, to you, how do you think about collaboration industry-wide? How do you think about data sharing? Is this something that could be pursued maybe better, or how is it going from your vantage point?
Sure, it's a great question. So there's many ways to think about how data sharing will work. And I think that it's important to step back and trace out a number of different regulatory and non-regulatory initiatives that are underway currently that I fully believe are going to radically reshape the amount of climate and sustainability data that investors and, by the way, the general public are going to have access to in the very near future. So I believe Inge is going to probably touch on some of the trends happening in Europe that are already well underway in her segment. I want to at least highlight a few examples, both internationally and here in the United States. And I have to apologize in advance for the gratuitous use of a few acronyms here. We love our acronyms in sustainable finance. But the first one I would highlight is the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, which was an initiative that set out it was launched in Glasgow, the COP 26 in Glasgow last November. And it's really this massive international consortium of different organizations that themselves have put forth kind of disclosures standards for different corporate disclosures and also investor disclosures. They've come together to form this kind of climate and sustainability framework that's intended to be adopted by financial regulators around the world. So they have an open comment period right now. They're seeking feedback from the public about the kind of initial kind of drafts that they put together. But really what they're seeking to do is create an international framework for how we can capture, gather, and then disclose sustainability data from across, again, corporate and investor spheres in a way that's really kind of unified and harmonized for the benefit of hopefully really all of us. So the ISSB is one that's a really major undertaking. Here in the United States, we have had more significant action from some of our regulators across various different spheres, one of which the Securities and Exchange Commission, our financial regulator, just recently released climate disclosure rules for companies and also some private market companies as well. And so this is going to really require, that every company, virtually every company is going to be required to report, scope 1, scope 2 emissions, potentially scope 3. And I'm sure we can talk about what those scopes are. But really, it's going to radically reshape how much information we have about where greenhouse gases are tracking across the entire economy. And just because of the size of the U.S. marketplace, I mean, this is going to really affect a lot of different entities, even those who have multinational operations. Mm-hmm. I would also mention that Inge and others have touched on the TCFD, or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. These recommendations were released in 2017, and they were initially, they've been voluntary in many ways. And it's kind of a cross-sectoral framework for disclosure of how companies and investors are considering and strategically reacting to climate-related risks and opportunities to their business models. But what's particularly notable about TCFD is that it included this element of forward-looking, what's called scenario analysis, which is essentially projecting out into future climate scenarios of warming over pre-industrial times. So you might think of 1.5 degrees Celsius as kind of the goal that we're all aiming towards these days. But what if we overshoot that target? What does a 2 degrees Celsius world look like? And how would that impact your business? What would a 3 degrees Celsius scenario look like? And how might that affect your business model as well? So it asks companies and investors to really look out ahead and strategically plan for what eventualities could occur. The reason I bring up TCFD is because just recently we've had a development here in the United States also where our National Association of Insurance Commissioners, who regulate insurance companies here, are now requiring that virtually every most, I think 80+% of insurance companies are going to be required to report against TCFD standards. Now, insurance companies, as many of you know, they're kind of the risk managers of society, and the fact that they're now going to be looking ahead, incorporating more forward-looking scenario analysis into their assessments of risk is really going to be quite significant. So all of this to say, all these interlocking elements are pointing towards the direction that we're going to be seeing a flood of new climate sustainability data in the near future. I think it's going to be the job of many different global actors from across the business, governmental, and indeed the non-governmental sectors to kind of take in all this information and really assess whether our economy is decarbonizing at the pace we need to reach that 1.5 degree goal.
This is fascinating, Max. Thank you so much for sharing this information. This really might, our viewers, some of them might be hearing this for the first time. So we appreciate the acronyms and the spelling out of the acronyms and the detail you're providing. It's very relevant. And you teed up a question for Inge, and so I'd love for her to respond to that, and to also to continue to make this relevant for our viewers. What is it that the single investor who's hoping to make an impact with their financial decisions and allocations, what is that you tell them? What should they be thinking about? So 2 in 1 for you there, Inge.
Yeah, sure. Very interesting what Max spoke to about TCFD initially starting out as a voluntary framework back in 2017. And similarly, in the UK, we've more recently seen that it has now also become mandatory for certain schemes over a certain size. The initial one is 5 billion to report in line with TCFD recommendations. And the view is that going forward, this will be rolled out to smaller schemes, possibly to the point where we are actually seeing all schemes having to report in line with TCFD. And I think also, what some of the viewers may be familiar with is that we have seen a lot of regulation come out in the EU specifically, as well as part of the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan, really established to help mobilize capital to more sustainable investments. And as part of that, some of the issues are around what is a sustainable investment. So again, the regulation coming out with clear guidelines as to what constitutes a sustainable investment, a lot of disclosure, looking at the sustainable finance disclosure regulations, the EU taxonomy. So really trying to find ways to standardize how we look at things so that we can ensure that assets are going to more sustainable investments. And I think just on to the second point, I think Elizabeth kindly covered quite a bit of that actually. And I guess the point is that irrespective of how big or small you are as an asset owner, your voice counts. And it is, largely because we have clients that are asking questions, also, triggering us to think of things differently. So we really do value the input that we receive from clients. And I think very importantly, as a client looking for, where do I want to invest, really to try and understand your manager's approach to thinking about sustainability? Is it really embedded in their DNA? Are they purely setting out policies, or are they able to actually evidence the impact and the outcomes that they are having? And are they able to show that effective stewardship that they are having with the companies that they are investing in by engaging? And what have the outcomes of those engagements been? And are they linking their voting activities, to these engagements as well? So, just as my closing point, I would say, as investors, we have a very important role to play in mobilizing capital to more sustainable investments. And while we have seen a significant amount of assets already start to move into sustainable investments, much more is needed in order to move the dial. And they say that with great power comes great responsibility. And I really think that we as investors need to be thinking and embracing the growing opportunities that we have to invest with intent.
Inge, so perfectly put. I wish I could have handed it off to you and hit a gong, because that was an excellent closing. But before we close, I would love to just bring Klaus in for the final word and to really talk a little bit about how you think about how you measure success. How does Bayer measure success? And how does your company's story, how is it an example for others in your sector? And just, I know we only have a minute left, and I wish I had more time to pick your brain. I had a previous life in pharma and biotech, so I have many more questions for you that I hope we can pick up in the future. But for now, talk to us a little bit about how you measure success.
Yeah, let's not do a benchmarking. I just want to talk about how we measure success. For me, it's three things. The first is we keep running with high speed, embedding this in business. And just as a very recent example is in the crop science division, the sustainability department was fused with the business strategy department. I think that's a strong signal that this is changing and is now in a different place where it has much more drive and also impact. The second thing is that we execute against what we committed. For me, super important. And I just want to say that we also want to go more and more to really measure impact, less and less into input commitments, much more into outcome commitments. And that's complicated, but a commitment to measure environmental impact reduction, I think, is one of the first true impact commitments which are out there in our industry. And last but not least, I have to use this opportunity. Forgive me, but if you want to help me and inside of the company to drive changes, make investments into Bayer which are assigned to ESG-related changes, and make it clear. This would help me tremendously to make it super clear that this matters from a financial perspective. And that's basically my ask to you. If you have any questions how this could work, if you have any proposals, what you want us to do differently, please contact me. But then, linking this to concrete investment decisions that would help us in the industry a lot to make it super clear that that's the way to go.
Thank you, Klaus. And that's a fair ask to all viewers. Become asset owners yourself and get involved in the decision making. And let's together really become the solution to the climate crisis. Thank you all for all that you do and everything you've shared, and for really moving money towards a sustainable future. Sustainable finance is such a critical component of what we're trying to accomplish here. And you are all very much engaged in this space in a way that gives me hope and a lot of positivity towards where the future of this sector is headed. So thank you very much for your time and for your input. I'm thrilled to close out our segment on investing with intent with Cara Williams. She is a senior partner and is the ESG strategy leader for Mercer. She also oversees Mercer's private wealth businesses in Canada and India, and works with Mercer's multinational clients to deliver the best of Mercer's broad wealth solutions. So it's not just positive financial outcomes for organizations and their employees, but sustainable ones that are ultimately win for wealth as well as for the planet. I can tell, Cara, that you are the woman to pick first if we're going to be in an intramural match. So you are the person I want on my team. Thank you so much for having this fireside chat with me.
Apologies. Thanks for having us on.
No, no worries at all. This is how we know we're still in the world of Zoom. So tell our audience a little bit how you think about supporting positive financial outcomes for your clients that are truly positive outcomes for the environment as well. The real question here is, can these actually coexist?
Absolutely, they can coexist. I mean, I think the not only the panelists, but also the speakers that we had at the beginning have highlighted the fact that there is no question that there's a direct interlink between doing right for the planet is actually good investment acumen. It's a factor that needs to be taken into consideration when you're looking to make your investments. So not only is it doing right, but it actually is a way for you to profit. And I think Elizabeth McGeveran even mentioned that herself, right? That these are not two disconnected concepts.
We've heard from your colleagues quite a bit about what you just said and how they think about the future of ESG, what Mercer is doing, what Bayer is doing, and what it means both internally within the sector, but also within the company, but also sector-wide. So what is the driving principle for private sector to mobilize against the climate crisis? Is it really ESG? Can this be what brings companies together internally and sector-wide?
Yeah, there's been a bit of a mention of a number of acronyms, and I think the fact that there's regulation that is coming in around the globe that initially starts off as voluntary pledges that various firms are making, and that the regulation now is becoming kind of more normalized as a really important step. So there is no question that you see just about every corporate now talking about sustainability in some shape, whether or not they've gone to the lengths that maybe Bayer has to incorporate these things into the way that they're trying to shift and change their business towards their own sustainable future, may not be necessarily quite as advanced. But there's no question that ESG, so that environmental, social, and governance factors are absolutely starting to take a big part at the corporate table, right? So you see most leadership teams that this is a core part of their discussions about, again, how are they going to shift their businesses for a changing world, and in order to make sure that it is a good place for people and for planet.
So how much of this is really being driven by internal desire to, well, Mercer, for example, is a company that's really leading in this. How much of this is really coming internally? And I don't mean necessarily to speak for other companies, but from somebody who is in this industry, what are you seeing? What are kind of the trends that we're seeing versus how much of this is actually coming from outside regulators that are demanding that, and hopefully becoming more persistent and finding some way to hold companies accountable for those that are delinquent, but how much of it is truly coming from within versus being mandated from outside?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's important to be cynical, right? When you're looking to mobilize your own savings towards investments, it's really important to have a good sense of whether or not you think a firm is authentic and what they're trying to achieve. And remember, it is ESG, right? So firms, not everybody has decided that necessarily certain aspects of climate are what they want to prioritize. Other firms have made it very clear that they really want, that it's the social agenda that they want to address, or it could potentially be certain governance aspects that they want to really work on. And it could be, a lot of times it's linked to what industries that they function in. There's no question that it's not necessarily true to the DNA of absolutely every firm that's out there. But what we are seeing is a lot of firms are starting to identify with the fact that having a purpose and having a value system in place is critical, not only for them and how they drive their business and where they go in their own futures, but also in engaging their employee base as well as shareholders, right? So there is always the link to profit. And, I'm not going to separate that, right? This isn't necessarily true altruism, but there's no question that a lot of firms have decided that there are certain aspects of ESG that are really important to them, have chosen those, made those very clear. And I think it was Inge before who referred to measurement, have said, here are very clear set targets that we want to be held to account for. They say those out loud, they say it in front of their people, they say it in front of shareholders. And I think that is a huge and critical step. Absolutely, there's still firms that maybe, we hear the term greenwashing a lot. There's surely firms that haven't quite figured it out yet, and certainly maybe firms who have the right intention but haven't quite figured out how to implement. ESG is massive, right? So if you look at environmental aspects and where do you set your priorities, or you look at the social aspects, where do you set your priorities there? It's an incredibly complex area, but as soon as a company can kind of drive down to the things that really are important to them, and again, will hold themselves to account for those things, you start to see some really amazing authenticity emerging from companies that start to have personalities rather than a brand. And I think it is an absolute growing trend. I think those of us who work for Mercer, there's certain priorities that have been very important to us for a very long time that our leadership has been very clear on, and they've been consistent, and we can believe it, right? So I think that's, we happen to be lucky, but there are a lot of other firms out there that do hold themselves to the same type of accountability as Mercer.
I like that a lot. Companies have personalities, and we can definitely see that. The public is engaging ever more with companies via social media platforms, via the app that we are on right now, the We Don't Have Time app. And so individuals can get this information, and it can really guide their decision-making behavior. So thank you for sharing this information, which might not be evident or easily accessible all the time. But we want to get the public on board, and we want to be able to share with the public the power that they have in terms of which companies to align with, which personalities match their own, right? So what does this mean for the individual? Why do their decisions matter? How do you think about that?
Their decisions matter. Let's go back to cynicism. Their decisions matter because they hold the dollars, right? So every single dollar matters to every single corporate if they want to last longer term. So I think that where we've seen the biggest shift is in the past. It used to be always about the biggest investors, right? The ones with the biggest asset pools that were driving decisions that were happening in corporations. What we're finding now is, 13, 14-year-old girl in Sweden can actually have genuine, true impact in shifting the way that governments are setting standards and policies. I think now people realize that an individual actually can be a lot more important in a decision and the shift that a company is going to make. There is no underestimating the power of the individual anymore. And social media certainly has made that much easier, right? So, I'm not sure we would all know who Greta was if it wasn't for the power of social media. So thanks to these types of platforms, hopefully people feel more engaged, feel more empowered. Because they absolutely are, and corporates absolutely listen to the individual, not only as the people who are potentially going to be investing into them, but also as future customers, as well as future employees. And I think there's a huge value chain along the value of every individual that wasn't recognized in the past.
And of course, individuals wear multiple hats. Individuals are part of communities. Individuals are affiliated with various organizations. Individuals are employees. And so what has Mercer learned along its sustainability journey that would be helpful and relevant for individuals that are somewhere along this journey themselves in a variety of different associations? So as the consumer, as the employee, Mercer is a multinational, and it's far along on the spectrum of where other companies are or hope to be as it relates to ESG. So some advice to those other multinationals or those that are somewhere between startup phase and establishing themselves as real contenders in sustainability activity. What are some of the takeaways that you could provide to them in terms of some of the challenges that Mercer has faced and has overcome?
I'd start with what Klaus referred to earlier. I think it's really important to be extremely honest with where you have had any kind of shortfalls, where you may not be achieving the targets that you wanted to achieve, missteps. I think again, this goes back to that level of authenticity of firms really being able to say, mea culpa, I did not do this right, and now I'm going to fix it, and being very open and honest about it. And that's, again, a big shift. You didn't see firms do this in the past. It was all about sort of the PR, shift to try to cover, kind of cover anything that they may have thought of as being negative. So I think the first step, and it's not an easy step, again, is establishing your own values. What do you want to stand for as a firm? Again, if we refer to the personalities, who do you want to be known as, regardless if you're, a FTSE 100 firm? Who are you, and what do you want to be held to account for? What do you want your people to be proud of? And then again, measure it and tell people where you are on your journey. Shift it, reassess it, reassign if it's not where you need to be. Become more aggressive in those targets if need be. And if you fall short, again, just honestly address that fact.
Fantastic, Cara. And in our last minute on this very auspicious date of April 22nd, Earth Day, what is the message you would like to share with our millions that are tuning in, that are listening, and that are hoping to learn something today and to take something away from this special day that is Earth Day? What would you like to leave our audience with?
I think the one word that would have been said and repeated most often amongst my fellow speakers today was engagement. And I think it is critical, especially as today is Earth Day. The more that you realize that you actually are responsible and you can engage with the people who are managing your money, the corporations where you're putting your money, the products that you're purchasing, the way that you deal with your own individual carbon footprint. We as people and each individual have so much more power than we ever had thought that we had. And I think that's been the most powerful shift that we've seen. And the beauty is that hopefully it's enough to recognize that in order to address climate change and hit the net zero targets that we've got, that each individual person starts to recognize the fact that we aren't powerless. This isn't about us sitting back and just having governments make all the changes. It's corporates, it's governments, it's individuals, all of us together as communities coming together to address what we've done.
I love that. Thank you so much. You really resonated with what we like to say at We Don't Have Time, is that together we are the solution to the climate crisis. Thank you so much, Cara, for humanizing finance. Really appreciate your thoughts and for taking the time to share them with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.